What we are about to share today is the story of a courtroom where respect was tested to its limits. You know who my father is, Your Honor, the man said with a smirk, leaning back as if this courtroom belonged to him. The judge did not interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. And that was the moment everyone in the courtroom should have been afraid. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to Sweet Justice, because stories like this reveal how power, arrogance, and justice truly collide. The judge adjusted the papers in front of him slowly, looked up at the defendant, and said calmly, "Please, continue." The rich businessman smiled, believing he had already won. He had no idea the judge was letting him dig his own grave. The defendant's name was Ethan Caldwell, a well-known real estate tycoon. Private jets, headlines, lawyers on speed dial. A man who had never been told no in his life. He stood in the defendant's box with his designer suit perfectly pressed, gold watch glinting under the bright courtroom lights. His lawyer whispered warnings, but Ethan barely listened. This case was supposed to be simple: charges of fraud, witness intimidation, abuse of power. But Ethan treated it like a business meeting he could dominate. When the prosecutor began reading the charges, Ethan laughed, not loudly, but just enough for the courtroom to notice. People turned their heads. The judge noticed too, yet he said nothing. Your Honor. Ethan interrupted suddenly, waving his hand dismissively. "Can we skip the drama? I've got a flight to catch." Gasps echoed through the room. The prosecutor froze. The lawyer nearly stood up in panic. Still the judge did nothing. He simply leaned back slightly and nodded. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "you have the floor." That single sentence shocked everyone more than anger would have. Ethan straightened his tie, emboldened. "Well," he began, pacing slowly, "this is all a misunderstanding. People like me create jobs. We build cities. And now I'm supposed to stand here like a criminal." He chuckled again. "My donations alone pay more taxes than most people in this room will ever earn." The courtroom was silent. The judge picked up his pen and placed it back down, not writing, not stopping him, letting him speak. Ethan mistook silence for weakness, and that mistake would cost him everything. Ethan Caldwell had spoken for nearly 15 minutes. Not once had the judge interrupted him. That alone made the courtroom uneasy. Normally, arrogance in court was corrected quickly: a warning, a sharp word, sometimes a threat of contempt. But this judge did none of that. He simply listened, his hands folded neatly on the bench, his expression unreadable, and Ethan misread that silence as surrender. He began walking a little farther from the defendant's stand, gesturing with confidence, as if delivering a keynote speech, instead of standing accused of serious crimes. "Let's be honest," Ethan said, turning slightly toward the gallery. "This whole case exists because people like me succeed, and people like them resent it." A low murmur moved through the courtroom. The judge raised his hand slightly. The room fell silent again. Ethan smiled, assuming he had pushed too far, and was finally about to be stopped. But the judge didn't scold him. Instead, he said calmly, "Mr. Caldwell, you're doing very well. Please continue." The prosecutor stiffened. The defense attorney swallowed hard, because they both understood something Ethan didn't. The judge wasn't losing control. He was giving it away intentionally, encouraging Ethan to talk, encouraging him to reveal himself. Ethan leaned forward, energized. "You see, Your Honor, when you reach a certain level," he said, lowering his voice as if sharing wisdom, "rules become flexible. That's not corruption. That's reality." The judge tilted his head slightly. Flexible, he repeated. Ethan nodded confidently. "Of course. You can't build an empire by asking permission for everything." The court reporter's fingers moved faster. The prosecutor looked down at her notes, eyes widening. The defense attorney leaned in urgently. "Ethan," he whispered, "please." But Ethan waved him off. "No, no," he said. "Let them hear it. Transparency, right?" The judge made a small note on the paper in front of him. "The first one," Ethan continued. "These witnesses they brought," he scoffed. "Former employees, bitter, disposable people who failed and now want revenge." One of the witnesses in the gallery stood abruptly before being gently pulled back into a seat by an officer. The judge watched this without emotion. Ethan noticed and smirked. "See?" he said. "Emotional. That's all this is." The judge finally spoke again. "Mr. Caldwell," he said evenly, "do you believe your wealth places you above the law?" The question was simple, too simple. Ethan laughed. Above, he repeated, "No. I believe it puts me beyond the limits of how the law understands success." The courtroom froze. Even his own lawyer looked stunned. The judge nodded slowly, as if considering a philosophical argument. "I see," he said. Asterisk. And then he said something that changed everything. "Mr. Caldwell, are you aware that this courtroom is not a stage, but a record?" Ethan shrugged. "Records can be edited." The judge smiled faintly. "No," he said. "They cannot." The judge leaned forward for the first time. "Mr. Caldwell, I want to make something clear," he continued. "Everything you have said today voluntarily is now part of sworn court record." Ethan's smile faltered for just a fraction of a sec. The prosecutor seized the opening. "Your Honor," she said quickly, "may I request the defendant's statements be formally entered as admissions relevant to intent and pattern of behavior?" "Granted," the judge replied without hesitation. Asterisk. Ethan turned sharply toward his lawyer. "What does that mean?" he whispered. His lawyer didn't answer. Because at that moment, the judge finally took control, not by force, but by precision. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, "you've repeatedly described actions that align with intimidation, coercion, and abuse of power." "That's not what I said," Ethan snapped. The judge raised a finger. "You said rules are flexible for people like you." Silence. "You said witnesses are disposable." Silence. "You said records can be edited." Asterisk. The courtroom felt smaller. Now, heavier. Ethan shifted his weight. The judge continued, his voice still calm, almost gentle. "I allowed you to speak because I wanted the court to see you exactly as you are, not as your lawyers frame you, not as your money protects you." Ethan tried to recover. "This is being taken out of context," he said quickly. "I was speaking hypothetically." The judge nodded. "Then let's add context." He turned to the prosecutor. "Call your first witness." Ethan stiffened. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Asterisk. The witness was a former project manager, a quiet man who trembled as he approached the stand. Ethan rolled his eyes dramatically. The judge noticed. "Mr. Caldwell," he said sharply for the first time, "this court has allowed you extraordinary freedom today. Do not mistake that for tolerance." Ethan sat back, suddenly aware that the room had shifted. The witness began to speak about falsified documents, threatening phone calls, quiet payoffs disguised as consulting fees. Ethan smirked until the prosecutor produced emails. Emails written by Ethan himself, printed, time-stamped, signed. Ethan leaned forward. Asterisk. These emails were taken without authorization, he said. The judge didn't look at him. "Objection noted," he said, then turned to the witness. "Continue." As more evidence unfolded, something became clear. Ethan hadn't just talked too much. He had confirmed the pattern by the time the witness stepped down. Ethan's confidence was cracked, not shattered, but fractured enough for fear to seep through. The judge addressed him again. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "do you still believe this court misunderstands success?" Ethan hesitated. The judge waited. That silence, the same silence Ethan once enjoyed, now worked against him. Asterisk. And for the first time that day, Ethan Caldwell did not smile. Asterisk. By the time the second witness stepped down, Ethan Caldwell's territory, the air itself had changed. The confidence that once radiated from him had been replaced by something unfamiliar, restraint, not humility. The kind a man uses when he realizes brute force won't work, and he needs to negotiate his way out. Ethan leaned toward his attorney. Witness testimony. Each piece sat neatly arranged before him, not as chaos, but as a pattern. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said calmly, "you've had the privilege of speaking freely today. Now, I have a question." Ethan straightened. Asterisk. "One question?" he asked. "That's it. So tell me, when you pressured your employees, altered records, and threatened witnesses, did you believe the court would never hear about it?" Ethan said carefully, "That misunderstandings happen, and misunderstandings can be resolved." The judge leaned back. "Interesting choice of words," he said, "because what I see here is not misunderstanding, it's intent. My client maintains his innocence." The judge raised his hand. Asterisk. "I'm not finished," he said. Then he did something no one expected. He turned away from Ethan and faced the courtroom. "This case, or jealousy, or success." He paused. "It's about arrogance, and what happens when arrogance mistakes patience for weakness." Laughter. "This court. You dismissed the witnesses. You spoke freely because you believed consequences were negotiable." Ethan shifted. And for a moment, the judge continued. I allowed you to believe that. Asterisk, a murmur rippled through the room. The judge reached for a single document, the one Ethan hadn't seen yet. This, he said, holding it up, is a sworn statement from a former associate you tried to silence. It was submitted last night. Ethan stood abruptly. That's impossible, he snapped. I would have known. The judge's eyes hardened. You didn't, he said, because for once, money didn't reach far enough. The document was entered into evidence. Ethan's attorney closed his eyes. The judge continued, his voice now firm, unyielding. You see, Mr. Caldwell, while you were busy speaking today, you confirmed every concern this court had about you. Ethan opened his mouth to respond. Asterisk, the judge stopped him. No, he said. You've said enough. The courtroom was completely silent now. You were given every opportunity to show restraint, the judge continued. He reached for the gavel. For crimes including fraud, coercion, witness intimidation, and abuse of power. Ethan's breath became shallow. This court finds you guilty. A collective gasp filled the room. Ethan shook his head. No, he said softly. No, that's not how this works. The judge didn't raise his voice. This is exactly how it works. Ends me, he snapped. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The judge leaned forward. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, he said. A man who believed money could replace character. He lifted the gavel. And today, you learned the cost of that belief. The sentence was swift. Prison time. Asset seizure. Cliffs back into his chair. The man who once commanded. He looked up one last time at the judge. Not with anger, but with disbelief. Because for the first time in his life, money had failed him. Asterisk, injustice had not raised its voice to win. It simply waited.